Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, where I'm going to present to you today the results of the ETSI project to develop teaching materials for education on standardization. This is a project we've been working on from mid-2016 until the end of last year to develop a textbook and a comprehensive set of slides to be used for education on standardization, particularly focused on ICT. It's not the only such material in existence. ISO have some material. There's education on standardization material from the Asia Pacific region, from the APEC organization. There's a number of different standards bodies in Europe have done things. There's some universities have their own, but most of those are quite generic information on standardization, whereas we wanted something focused on ICT. So today I'm going to look at basically giving you an overview of what we have done and how it could be used, in particular in the case of this Elite S project that is ongoing. I'm not going to walk through the slides of each section of the book or anything else like that. We probably will do a separate set of webinars, which we may record first, where we effectively run each chapter as like an online course, probably without an audience, and make those available. That's for a later stage. Today, I'm just introducing what we have done, walking through the content at a high level, chapter by chapter, and giving you some ideas as to how it could be used. So first of all, an overview of what exactly we've done. We had a task force here in ETSI, which was financed by the European Commission and the European Free Trade Association Secretariat. We called it STF 515. You may see that name elsewhere, but it's an internal ETSI code. They were basically developing a comprehensive course on ICT standardization to be used in third level education, more or less. And the overall objective in doing this is to try and ensure or increase the awareness and the understanding of standards and standardization in future engineers in particular, but not just engineering students, but in particular engineering students. Basically to introduce to them the concepts of standards and standardization at a much earlier phase. Most of the time, the people we talk to in the standards world have heard about standards, have gained their standards knowledge only once they join the company, which sends them to the standards committee. They kind of learn on the job. The whole project, financed by the European Commission, hosted by ETSI, was the management of the project came from the Fraunhofer Center for International Management and Knowledge Economy, which is based in Leipzig. But we had experts from many different domains in the project. So as you see there, we started beginning of 2016 and we ended at the end of last year, as in we deliver the materials, but of course now we've got to go out and make use of them and prepare for a later edition. So what have we delivered? Well, a slide pack. There's actually 395 slides, including all of the title slides and placeholders and whatnot. A 270-page textbook, and it's 270 A4 sized pages, so it's quite a big volume. And inside the textbook and the slides, we've had to develop and work on case studies, quizzes for the end of each chapter, examples, and imagery and diagrams, basically to accompany the book, and that can be used both on the slides and in the textbook. Initially, we had to go out and interview key players, industry, academia, people who have already got experience in standards world or less so, to find out exactly what the needs were and what experience people had in terms of teaching standardization. Because as I said, there is already some effort in Europe and elsewhere to do some teaching on standardization. We realized from the beginning it had to be modular. Nobody, or very few people, were going to deliver the content from beginning to end. That's not how university courses are developed or structured. You pick and mix according to the different sources that you have and the different needs of your students and the time available that you have to deliver the content. So it needed to be modular, it needed to fit different education levels, not just focused on undergraduate third level students, and it needed to suit different study programs. So in other words, not just engineers. We also had to take into account the needs of, for example, business students, economics students, and law students, because standardization has an impact or has relevance for their work. And all of this needs to be available and is now available from the ETSI website for free. You can download a PDF of the slides, probably you have already. You can download the PDF of the textbook, I hope you have already. If you want to get the PowerPoint version of the slides to be able to integrate them into your coursework or whatever, it's also available for free. You simply need to request it from ETSI, and we'll provide you with a specific license, which literally a letter which proves that you have a license to use this content and to integrate it into your work and to modify it and adapt it as you need. And if you wish to have a paper copy of the book, we've now managed to get it online or get it sold through a number of online bookstores at quite a cheap price for a textbook. And you'll see this link, the etsy.org/standardization-education. That's a virtual link basically to the web page where all of this is focused. Anything and everything we have on this topic will be through that link, standardization-education. If we look inside the standards, the slides and the book that we have, we've developed a curriculum to cover a range of topics. So obviously we have to start at the beginning. We cover the basics of standardization. There's a whole chapter in the book devoted to this, and there are some courses which may never go beyond this level, some students which maybe don't need anything more than this. We look at the standards ecosystem, in other words, the different organizations that are involved in standardization and the differences between them, the international, regional, national, but also industry standardization bodies that may exist. We take a look at the production of standards, how standards are made, who's involved in producing them, and the different roles that they have. And then we go and look at a maybe slightly different level. We look at the relationship between standardization and innovation, standardization and the strategy of a firm, standardization and intellectual property rights and how that may impact the business side of things. And also we look at the economic impact of standardization, the impact of standards on the economy in general. Note that with each of these, we have not tried to develop new research material. That's not been our goal. Our goal has been to use the research material that is out there already published and build our textbook making reference to the existing research that's done. So for example, we haven't launched studies on the economic impact of standardization. Other standards bodies, other organizations have done that, and we have linked to or made reference to or extracted content or information from those studies. Who's involved or who has been involved? As I said, it was managed by Fraunhofer IMW in Leipzig. It's Dr. Nizar Abdelkafi who has been responsible for this. He's teaching in the University of Leipzig as well as his Fraunhofer role, and I think he's focused on innovation and standardization and the relationships between them. Raffaele Bola from University of Genoa in Italy. He's an active professor. He teaches. He's got his students. He's also active in one or two ETSI standards committees, in particular related to environmental engineering, equipment characteristics, that sort of thing. Kees Lanting, he's based in the Netherlands. He's also another person who has been active in ETSI and I think also in the ITU in terms of standardization. Alejandro Rodriguez Ascazao, he's from effectively the Spanish equivalent of the Open University, so it's kind of an adult education or Open University thing that they have in Spain, but he has also been involved in ETSI standardization work. Theresa Stein, also from Fraunhofer in Leipzig. Marina Thuns, also from Fraunhofer in Leipzig. And Michelle Wetterwald, she's based locally near in ETSI. She's been highly active in Horizon research projects for the Eurocom Institute here in ETSI. It's a third level, or here in the region, it's a third level institute. She teaches locally in the University of Nice. She teaches in Paris, and she is an active participant in, for example, our Intelligent Transport Systems Committee here in ETSI. And I've been the project coordinator for the later phases. So the main thing, what I'm trying to say to you is that we've assembled a good cross-section of people, different nationalities, different experience levels, actively teaching, but also active in standardization, not just in ETSI. I pointed out their ETSI participation, but they've been involved in other activities as well. Some of them have been researching standardization, like, for example, NISAR. Some of them are standards practitioners, and others are more facing students more regularly, especially engineering students. So let's look a little bit closer at what we have delivered in terms of the teaching materials. What's inside the book? What's inside the slides? So coming back to our main goals, yes, we wanted to improve the awareness of standardization, the standards knowledge in students leaving our universities. So to do that, we need to facilitate education among the students, but also the lecturers, basically you who have to impart this knowledge to the students. We wanted also to boost the position of ICT standardization in the different programs, in the different curricula that you teach, so to create an awareness of the need for this. And why would we want to do this? I mean, why do we even want to increase the knowledge of standardization in general? Well, it's really all about improving the employability of graduates in the future. If you can come out of an engineering course and you have this knowledge of standardization that many of your competing students or competing graduates don't have, then it's kind of like a cherry on top in terms of your ability to. Hang on a second, I'm getting interrupted here. It's like a cherry on top in terms of your ability to reach out to employers. We're now reaching, the target audience that we've been reaching out to with this content has been primarily, yes, of course, students and teachers. But what level of students? Well, still at higher education, yes, third level, polytechnics and universities, engineering students, undergraduates, postgraduates, doctoral candidates, and I guess in your case it will be postdoctorates as well, but also law students, management students, MBA candidates, for example. There are elements of the materials that we have developed which are certainly relevant for their courses, and in particular for law students, any students dealing with intellectual property or corporate law. It is quite important that they have an understanding of standards world, standardization in general. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more impact on the legal profession from the standardization world. But of course, it doesn't just end at students, because in fact, what we're seeing is that even ETSI's members, the companies, industry, are interested in using the results of what we've delivered for example, in company teaching, in company training. So anywhere that you need to teach about standards in general, standardization, the mechanisms, the value of standardization, the economic impact, how to deal with standards and strategy, and so on and so forth, the material we've developed is relevant for them. Teachers obviously are a key, teachers, lecturers are a key audience, and that's why we're here on the call today. And that's where I think the textbook probably comes in, because it goes much further than the slides that you will deliver to students, even if the textbook is available for free. There's a lot of material in this book that we have developed, so I think it should be a good basis in trying to help you build your teaching courses on this, to actually look in the content of the textbook and see what is being said and what is being delivered. We structured the content knowing that some of the students that we'll be talking to will not have any previous knowledge. Most of the students will not have any previous knowledge on standardization, which is why, for example, our initial chapter on the basics of standardization is quite an important foundation for those attending courses or for those reading some of the later chapters. So as I said, the first step that we had to do was to go out and interview people to find out what are the experiences in terms of teaching standardization, what are the needs, what are the demands. So we had a main interviews step at the beginning. We did a total of 26 different interviews. I said 25 earlier, and which is 26. And we've identified 7 main topics, which are here. Introduction to the basics is very important, that one. Working with standards, how to use standards, how to navigate a standards document. We've managed to cover that. The standards landscape, or processes or rules that are in use in different bodies. Management related to standardization. IPR, standardization in the firm, basically, the macroeconomic perspective, and regulation and law in standardization. And when you look at the topics that we have delivered in the textbook and the slides, you'll see that we've effectively structured them into 2 major parts, basically. There's an initial part where we introduce and teach the key concepts in standardization. So those are chapters 1 to 4 in the book, and the slide set is structured similarly. It has an introduction and the same chapter numbers, apart from the conclusion. More advanced topics, which might not necessarily also be relevant for standards practitioners, for those involved in the committees, are standards and innovation, strategic perspective, business perspective, and the economic perspective on standardization. Although even standards practitioners or young standards engineers would certainly benefit from understanding certainly the IPR and standardization slides, and have some ideas of standardization and innovation and how they relate to each other. And inside each chapter of the textbook, we have tried to include the learning objectives in the beginning, the key messages, so you can position the chapter as what is this chapter going to deliver. And at the end, a glossary, a list of abbreviations, and a list of reference texts. We've tried to make as many academic references in the textbook as possible, and those are also copied over into the slides. And here we're looking at an example of the table of contents of a typical chapter. So let's not look at what the contents are, but you'll see basically you have the main sections, an introductory section, and then at the end, the summary of the chapter, quiz or set of questions for which we provide answers at the end of the book, a glossary of terms, a list of abbreviations, and a set of references. And each chapter, apart from I think chapter 1 and probably chapter 9, the conclusions, each chapter with real content in the book is structured exactly the same way. So we have 4, 5, or 6 main sections in the chapter, followed then by the summary, quiz, glossary, list of abbreviations, and references. Inside each chapter, you'll find a structure, or you'll find certain visual guidelines to navigating it. For example, we've used as much as possible graphics and drawings. We've got a lot of those commissioned for the book. We highlight definitions where we provide definitions or pseudo definitions like this one here. We provide examples that are highlighted in a different color with a more of a blue background, or no, gray background. And we highlight case studies as well, so that they have a particular visual highlighting, so you can clearly identify them and differentiate examples, definitions, case studies from the main body of the text. So here, for example, on this slide, you see how we treat an example. It's visually different from the base text, which is immediately above it, and it's visually different from a definition. We have numerous different images and diagrams which throughout the book basically use the same style to give the impression of coherence. And we've used or reused as many of these images as possible on the slides, changing their layout a little bit to make them a bit more readable. Sometimes it's difficult. And also introducing some new ones in the slides as well. So as I said, again, looking at the table of contents, we have for each chapter a summary of the main concepts introduced, a quiz, a set of questions. I think they're all multiple choice questions to make it a bit easier. Set of references, a glossary, a list of abbreviations, and all again following the same style, chapter after chapter at the end of each chapter. If you look into the slides, you'll see that the slide structure is exactly the same as the book structure. Okay, if you look at the table of contents today, you'll see clause 9, conclusion, has been removed because there's no real need for it in the slide set. But all of the other preceding chapters have exactly the same title and structure. It matches the book, it parallels the book completely. So you'll find, again, a clear indication in the slides with the use of a double title where you can see where in the slides you are. The section numbers correspond to the section numbers in the book. And then diagrams and drawings, as you see, are similar to those in the book as well. In fact, some of them are identical. And again, at the end of each chapter in the book, we have a list of abbreviations and a list of references. And these tend to be the ones in the slides, so they're a subset of the corresponding abbreviation and reference list in the book. Now, when we did the interview study, we didn't just get information as to what was needed in terms of content of education, but also experience feedback from people using different educational material in teaching standards. So we knew that, as I said earlier, we need to be able, or you need to be able to mix and match the content to, for example, and it's what we recommend, start with maybe the standardization basics, and if you're teaching law students, then skip most of the following chapters and go straight on to the law and IPR. You will probably not want to deliver all of the slides in a particular chapter. You may want to add your own slides and content to it. We know that this has to be possible. It may be that you need to change the background of the slides, the slide template, to match something that your school uses or that you use personally on other slides. Again, we know this has to be possible. So we've had to accommodate that, both in the way we develop the slides, the slide structure, the layout, but also in the license that we give you when you get access to the PowerPoint file. And that's one of the main reasons why we want you to request a copy of the PowerPoint file, so that we give it to you with a specific license to allow you to do this sort of thing. And that you have documentary proof of having such a license in case you're ever asked for it inside your institution. We've also tried to make an effort on accessibility, in particular, ensuring that the PDF versions of the PDF version of the book, in particular, is accessible. Try to unlock as many of the accessibility features in PDF in terms of keeping the reading order, the book structure coherent, and also the reading order on each page, and of course, alt text for each image or diagram where it's impossible to put it in. And as I said, in terms of mixing, matching content or elements of the content, you could, for example, follow what we have suggested here. It's just a suggestion that you may wish for your engineering students, for example, to focus on the first 4 in the book, where you deal with the details of standardization, and perhaps only touch briefly on some of the later chapters, strategic perspective, the business perspective, and so on. Whereas, for example, for law or MBA students, you may in fact choose to say less in detail on chapters 3 and 4, where you really look at the standardization ecosystem, the different standards bodies involved, the roles of different parties. You will probably need the introduction to standards. Okay, so yeah, I think here I'm basically repeating what I've said previously in terms of the availability of the teaching materials. Go to this link, etsi.org/standardization-education. Anytime we have anything new to put up, we'll put it up at this location. So as I said, the textbook and the slides are both available for straight download as PDF files. So if you haven't already gotten them, go ahead and take a look. PowerPoint slides available upon request. It's a very large file, so we'll send you a link to download them. It's about 30-something megs. All free of charge, of course. And the book available for purchase. I've published it through a UK website, so the pricing from their website is £16.99 plus delivery. It hasn't started shipping yet, although purchase it, but it may be a few weeks before you actually get your copies. The web page, again, the same website link. You'll find a link to the publisher's bookstore, and you'll find a link to other bookstores, including several Amazon sites where you'll get Euro pricing, where for some reason there's a huge between the price in Germany, the German Amazon store, and the price in, say, the Italian or Spanish Amazon store. But so shop around, you'll get different prices, or directly from the publisher. Now, what I'd like to do is to go through the teaching materials chapter by chapter and take a closer look, not a full walkthrough of the content, but a closer look at what exactly is in each chapter. What does each chapter really cover? So again, if you look at the structure that we had said, it's an implicit structure. You have the first 4 chapters talk about or deal with the key concepts, and then the later 4 chapters, 5, 6, 7, and 8, deal with the more advanced topics. Now, you don't see that direct structure presented to you in the book. There isn't a part 1 or part 2, but keep this overall structure in mind. The first 4 chapters, but the first 3 main chapters, chapters 2, 3, and 4, are for key concepts, and chapters 5 to 8 are for the more advanced details, which you may not wish to cover completely. You may wish to focus on one or the other of these chapters. So again, yeah, visually, the different structure that we have here. Now, let's look at the first 2 chapters, the introduction being just that, an introduction, so let's not spend time on it. But chapter 2 in particular, you see we have an introduction to standards, the basics of standardization, benefits and risks, the standards landscape, the different bodies involved at a high level, standardization process at a glance, so how do standards work, how do you make a standard in general terms, and using standards, in other words, how to navigate a standards document. What's what? Are there different particular sections or clause numbers that need to be looked at. We've given examples of different standards from different organizations, and we're seeing how they treat things, how are requirements specified, what language is used in the standards that you need to pay attention to. So basically, to provide a high-level overview of the standards scope and process, we don't presume any prior knowledge. And I think this chapter 2 is a good place to start with any education on standardization for people that do not have prior experience or knowledge in standardization. So I think in any course that you do, look into chapter 2, into using the content in here. I think it could well be the place you need to look for the higher level overview of standardization. Moving on into chapter 3, here we do presume some knowledge. So we do presume, if you go through chapter 3, that you have already looked at chapter 2 or most of the content in chapter 2. And we take a little bit more of a deeper dive into the standards ecosystem, the different standards development organizations, these SDOs, and the types of standards that they produce. So we first of all look at the different types of organizations, for the formal standards bodies, the de facto standards bodies, the public or private organizations that might exist around specific issues, industry fora and consortia, basically. So we look at that kind of aspects. We look at national, regional, international standardization. How do you coordinate all of this, cooperation across them? We look at the process of adopting standards, for example, industry standards which get adopted at a higher level, or transposition of standards into national standards. We look at that to a certain extent. We look at the different types of documents produced by standards bodies. We don't only produce standards in a standards body, we produce reports, we produce other documents like white papers, how to distinguish between them, what's the relevance of each one. Not everything, just to remember, not everything that comes from a standards body is a standard. And we look, yes, at naming conventions that are related to that, and we look at a particular case study on how a national standard in Spain was revised. So the actual process of revising a national standard, we looked at that in some detail and gave some examples of the things we had delivered earlier in the previous parts of chapter 3. Looking at chapter 4, there are some interesting things in here. We're now looking at the production of standards. So the standards process and to standards development process, but also who participates, how do they participate? And this could be quite important. Again, chapters 2 and 3 are probably the best prerequisites for this. We do look at the standardization scene. Well, it's not an overlap of the ecosystem which we had in the previous chapter. Here we're looking at, I guess it's a bit of a misnomer, the standardization scheme. We're actually looking at processes that are used in different standards bodies. We're looking at, for example, a code of good practice for developing international standards, criteria for good standards, and so looking at the code of practice and criteria and mapping them then onto the processes that are used which ensure these take place. As I said, who's involved in the standardization process, the roles that are involved, the competencies that you need to have in a standards expert, basically. What should the activities of a standardization expert, so not just their competencies, what characteristics do you need to find in the person that you may be sending to a standards meeting or that you need to develop in a standards professional, but then what is the job of a standards expert, a standards professional actually involve? Does he just sit in a meeting room all day and drink coffee, or does he actually have some real work? And some of this is not just activities, it's recommended activities. And this is where this chapter could be very interesting for in-company training of, for example, future standards engineers, to give them a real insight as to what their job could be, should be, if they were to do it properly and in full. And we've taken a look here, in particular, in the Third Generation Partnership Project. If you've not heard of it, it's basically the international standards project, which develops all of the 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G standards for mobile telephony. And it's a partnership project across different standards bodies, including my own here in ETSI. Then moving beyond the key concepts, we want to look at the more advanced topics. And as I said earlier, we don't expect all of the previous chapters to be covered when you start to work on, for example, standards and innovation in Chapter 5. However, the basics should be understood. So Chapter 2 should be a prerequisite for dealing with this Chapter 5 standards and innovation. So here we're looking at basically innovation and standardization, and also research and standardization. It's not necessarily the same thing. There are misconceptions sometimes that innovation and standardization are not happy bedfellows, shall we say. They're actually, one is blocking the other, that standardization, you try and harmonize and don't innovate, and in the innovation world, you shouldn't have to follow standards. Well, actually, it's not at all that simple. There's a strong interdependency. Innovation can lead to the development of new standards. The standardization process can trigger new innovation. So it isn't a black and white situation. And in fact, there's a strong codependency between each other. And likewise, research and standardization to look at different techniques of how to link the research activity and standardization. So you'll see here, yeah, the interdependencies between standardization and innovation, research and standards, and formal standardization being a driver for innovation. For example, for business model innovation, not necessarily technical innovation. Looking on further in Chapter 6, we have the strategic perspective on standardization. So here we're looking at how would you use standardization in a company. So for the benefits of a particular company, why do companies go down the path of using standardization in general or participating in it? So do we look at their different strategies, the external influences or conditions which might apply to a company, which might drive it towards standardization? We look at, for example, the strategies of how they participate in the standardization world, how they work inside a committee. It can be quite strategic at times in how they form alliances or otherwise. And also, yes, communication with standardization activities, communication about your standardization activities, choosing your standards and choosing your standards body. What criteria would a company use? Why would they even make a choice of one or other standards body? Well, in fact, they do very carefully choose which body to go for which activity. And it's not just a technical decision or a decision based on the activity in a particular committee, the technical activity. It can also be in terms of where your competitors are. It can be in terms of the legal perspective, the IPR policy, or where your potential customers are, or something like that. And again, with this chapter, we don't presume a detailed knowledge of all of the previous chapters. We think probably Chapter 2 is a sufficient prerequisite for Chapter 6. Looking at Chapter 7, there we're looking at IPR and standardization, or effectively the different monetization strategies that you may have to monetize your research or your R&D inside a company. So it's not simply the dry topic of patenting. But it's basically, yeah, we want people to have enough knowledge to make informed decisions about what instruments to use, patenting, publishing, standardization, or a combination of all of them. And of course, the first step is to understand how intellectual property rights, how patent rights are handled in many standards bodies, and what links there are between them, how some standards bodies are quite open to patents. Some of them are insisting on a very royalty-free process, to understand that there is a distinction between them. And then we introduce in 7.3 something which could be quite valuable, again for companies, but also for economic students or business students, a decision-making tool, basically, which could allow you to come to a decision as to whether to standardize or to patent, or to do a combination of both, which is more common among different companies. So you'll see that decision-making tool in action in 7.3 in the book and in the slides. And in 7.4, we'll apply that to two particular case studies where companies who have had a choice of what to do and have chosen one or other or a combination of both policies, standardizing and patenting. And finally, we take a look at the economic perspective on standardization, basically the macroeconomic level. More or less, the standards and strategy and standards and IPR are kind of looking at the microeconomic level. But at the macroeconomic level, we look at this in Chapter 8, and also as part of that to gain an impact or understanding of the relationship between public procurement and standardization. So we look at the economic contribution of standards, in particular standards, the contribution to the GDP of different nations. There have been a number of studies on this, and with broadly similar results in each case, different countries in different phases of their development cycle, but broadly similar results. We look at the economic impact of standardization in terms of how standardization can bring an economic value to firms, to an ecosystem, and the ways in which you can judge or measure or even conceptualize the economic impact, for example, in terms of interfacing, in terms of quality system standards, in terms of variety reduction standards, in terms of measurement, or what you could call information standards, common standards for measurements. And then at the end, we take a look at public standardization, how standardization can influence and impact public procurement policies, and how they can also take benefit from standardization. Also, if you do use our book and our slides, we would appreciate feedback from you. We have a feedback form available. It's not at this link, it's on this page, which is behind this link. It's linked from standardization-education. So we would appreciate your feedback, in particular because we do have plans to create a second edition of the book. We know already that there are some sections of it which need better coverage. We would like to do more case studies, whether they're published in the book or whether they're just in the slides. That's a different point, but we would like to do much more case studies. We know that that's of very high value to those who are teaching standardization. But there may be other things that you have in mind. There may be other aspects which we haven't spotted, or you may simply find errors in the book or disagree with something that we have said. We really would appreciate your feedback. Even just to tell us that you're using it, it's already very good. We've had quite a number of requests for the PowerPoint slides already. I've been quite surprised. I see already some purchases of the book, quite a lot of downloads. But if you are using it, in particular if you're building a course around this, we really would appreciate to know about it, because then it's always good, in fact, when the Commission come looking to see how has this been used, where we can also demonstrate this to them. So basically then, in summary, in conclusion, you can see that we've developed quite a comprehensive set of teaching material with the textbook, the set of slides, which I hope you've had a chance to look at. That it's aimed at students for engineering, third level, but also at Masters of Business, management level, or law students as well, and of course their teachers. We've gone through some of the design, we've gone through a high-level walkthrough of the content, you've seen how you could structure and pick and mix the different elements of the slides and the book. So basically, yeah, it's over to you. And of course, what we now need to discuss as well is what more can I deliver in terms of information to you for to help you deploy this book, use these slides with or without your own content. That's a different issue. To get you up and running and to be able to allow you to use this content in a teaching environment or in a classroom environment. So with that, I think that was my last slide. And basically, so as I said, thanks very much for taking the time to listen to this. And now I think we'll move to questions.